While I've only really talked about this band once before, that one time being my Q&A video, it's no secret to anyone who's ever spoken with me that I absolutely adore Into Eternity. For those unaware, Into Eternity is a band from Regina, Canada that released their first album back in 1999. Their main sound is a combination of progressive death metal, melodic death metal, and power metal. Over the course of the band's existence, they have released 6 studio albums, and at the time of this video's scripting, they have another one in the works. And I've mentioned this band so many times in conversations with friends that I'm pretty sure some of them will kill me if I ever mention them again.
I swear to God, if you mention Into Eternity one more fucking time, I'm going to gut you where you stand. Do you hear me, you fucking degenerate? I will gut you like a fucking pig if you mention those faggots one more time.
But I didn't even mention Into Eternity yet.
Motherfucker.
But yes, all jokes aside, as the title suggests, today I will be giving you my personal ranking for all of Into Eternity's studio albums from worst to best. So without further ado, let's get started. Starting off this list, we have Into Eternity's debut record, which is by no means bad, it's just that it has a lot of elements that hold it back from being on par with the rest of the band's discography. Sure, this album has some catchy tracks, but the production isn't that great. I'm not the biggest fan of the vocals on this record. They aren't bad per se, they just aren't that great. And overall, it has a much less polished feel to it compared to the rest of the band's music. Overall, it's not bad, but it isn't that great either. Okay, now despite this album being relatively low in terms of its ranking, and despite it being admittedly a bit divisive, I still really enjoy this record. While it isn't their best work, it lacked the emotion on display on their other records, and the vocal performance from Stu Block, who is now one of the vocalists for Iced Earth, takes a bit of getting used to. However, despite this, the vocals themselves aren't bad in the slightest. And the record still has a lot of upsides to it, and I really enjoy a number of the tracks on this record. And given the fact that this is the shortest album in the band's discography, it's definitely an easy record to come back to. So after a 10-year absence, Into Eternity came back in late 2018 with their most recent release at the time of this video scripting, The Sirens. While it is in essence a return to form, it does quite a few things different from the albums that came before, such as the addition of the band's current vocalist Amanda Kiernan, who does a phenomenal job on this record, especially given the role that she had to fill after the departure of Stu Block in 2012. The drums on this, however, are a mixed bag. While the actual drumming from Brian Newberry is really good, this record doesn't have that great of a mix, so the drums sound a bit off at times. Other than that though, The Sirens is a great record. It isn't groundbreaking or anything, but it's definitely a fun listen. Dead or Dreaming, the band's second effort following their debut. It was definitely a change in direction when compared to its predecessor, and honestly, I wasn't expecting it to hold up nearly as well as it does. Its production is miles better than Into Eternity's debut record, and the vocal harmonies on this album are really fucking good. Granted, not as good as on other releases, but still really good. In addition to having better production than the first record, I'd also argue that the songwriting is a bit more complex here as well. All in all, Dead or Dreaming is a really damn good record that still holds up incredibly well. Ah yes, The Scattering of Ashes. Now we get to the really good stuff. Released in 2006, The Scattering of Ashes was the first of 2 albums to feature the aforementioned Stu Block, an absolutely phenomenal vocalist who gives one of my favorite vocal performances period on this album. This release is filled with great tracks such as Severe Emotional Distress, Nothing, Timeless Winter, Out, A Past Beyond Memory, Surrounded by Night, and Pain Through Breathing. And yes, I know that's 7 out of the 11 tracks on this album. That's just how good this project was. Sure, I wouldn't say it's their most complex piece, but it is a fun listen that is incredibly easy to come back to. Hell, I've listened to this album so much, you might say it's my musical equivalent of crack. However, even with all my praise of this record, there is still one more album in Into Eternity's discography that tops it. For those familiar with all of this band's releases, you already know what it is. But for those who aren't, well, let's just cut the bullshit and get right into it. Buried in Oblivion, my personal favorite album of all time. Where do I even begin? Well, for starters, despite being their most complex record in my personal opinion, it also manages to be their catchiest, especially due to this record having absolutely incredible vocal harmonies. Sure, Chris Kral, the vocalist on this record, is not in the same tier as Stu Block or even Amanda Kiernan, but he does a really good job, and his vocals carry a really emotional tone, especially aided by the aforementioned vocal harmonies. This album opens on a high note with Splintered Visions and comes to a somber close with the melancholic track Morose Seclusion. While the rest of Into Eternity's releases are mostly amazing, none of them really managed to capture the same level of emotion that was on display here. And that's funny, seeing as one of the first tracks on the Skydark of Ashes is called Severe Emotional Distress. I could really go on for days on end about how much I absolutely adore this record, no Numenorian, but I think I'll just sum it up by saying, in my personal opinion, Buried in Oblivion is a fucking masterpiece. So, there we have it. That is how I would rank all of the albums from Into Eternity. With that being said, this is the Absolute Degenerate signing off. Peace out, everyone.